One. Hello. I'm going to tell in this video 4 different experiences I had with US Army chaplains. I served in the US Army for 20 years on the enlisted side. 14 years was active duty, and I finished up with 6 years in the New York Army National Guard. Infantry for 14, and then I was armor, tanks after that. And you know, the military afforded us a chance to worship on Sundays, even if no matter where we were, there was always a chaplain there, and they did afford us worship. You know, whether it could be non-denominational. I don't know how they do it now. Services, were kind of generic. But that's not really what this is about. 4 different experiences. I'll start with the earliest one. When I was a paratrooper. And, I was going to church as often as I could then. Usually by myself. So I was married with children at the time. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And, I was really seeking God and seeking out God's will and His ways. And one time, I recall, I was on a parachute jump. And I was in the aircraft, loaded up with all my gear, parachute and all that stuff. About 100 guys packed into that plane, maybe more, C-130 or 141 jet. And sitting next to me was our battalion chaplain. That would be like seems like he was a lieutenant, a colonel. Could he have been a captain? He was an officer. And he was a designated chaplain for our battalion, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. So I actually thought, oh, good. Hey, I get this. I'm in good hands now. I'm sitting next to the man of God here. Real good hands. Paratroopers are superstitious people. Trust me. Oh, I thought that was really great that I was sitting next to the chaplain while we're flying around for an hour or so, however long we were flying around, before we all jumped out the airplane with our parachutes. And so I had some time to talk to him. And this really isn't a very long story, but I'll tell you, this man was, at the time, looked to be 40, if not older than 40, which was kind of old for that unit. And he'd been in the military for quite a while at that point. And I asked him a question, and I'll never forget what he said to me. It's a short story. Make of it what you will. I said, "Oh, sir," call him sir because he was an officer, even a chaplain. A lot of them don't like being called sir. So I asked him, "What do you think God's will is? What's the Bible say about the morality of killing in warfare? What does the Bible say about the morality of killing in warfare, according to God's Word?" I was expecting to be enlightened. You know what he said to me? He goes, "Heck if I know." He says, "All I know, this is a lot easier than being an artillery officer." I was dumbfounded. He said, "Yeah, I was an artillery officer and I didn't like it. It was too much work. So now I'm a chaplain. I switched over." And he just shrugged it off and laughed, and that's as far as that conversation went. Man of God. Again, I asked him, what does the Bible, God's Word, say about the morality of killing in warfare? I was an infantryman, Grunt. So I wonder about these things as a Christian. And his reply, he laughed, shrugged his shoulders, and said, "Hell if I know." He says, "All I know is this is a lot easier than being an artillery officer, or an officer in artillery." That's what he was. He was in artillery before he became a chaplain. I didn't say anything to him. The whole conversation ended right there. But obviously I didn't think very highly of him at that point, but I let it go. But I never forgot it, and I'm sharing that with you. So that was our chaplain. Man of God, huh? He came over from the artillery to be a chaplain just because he wanted an easier job. Those were his own words. And he didn't even try to answer my question, which was a very legitimate question for a Christian soldier to wonder about the morality of killing in combat. I didn't get anything out of him. All right, that's story one. Story two. This was the same unit. I was still a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. And we got a new chaplain in, a young man, I'd say 25 or 30, a captain. I can still see him in my mind. And he was our new chaplain. And this man was extremely spirit-filled, and he gave his services. I used to go to our chapel, and his services were outstanding. You know, people go to church on a Sunday morning or whenever they go because they're hungry to be filled with God's Word. At least most people do. And, you know, they're hungry for God's Word. They're hungry to have that, to be filled and to be instructed and to be in communion with God and His people. And this man actually, his services were very, very spirit-filled. And we got along pretty well, him and me, and he and I, whichever. And I just remember him telling me that he wasn't going to be around for long. He said the division chaplain, you know, whoever was in charge of all the chaplains in the 82nd Airborne Division then, they did not want him giving very spiritual sermons. They like to keep things kind of dry. You know, they used to say when I was in total soldier, body, mind, and spirit, that they'd try to see that we're strong in body, mind, and spirit. But honestly, we worked out every day really hard, obviously, body, and they watched our diet pretty closely too, and tried to discourage us from drinking too much. Sometimes it seemed the other way around, actually. Spirit, they really weren't too keen on that. They gave us all the opportunities you could want to go to a church service, in the field, overseas, wherever you were at. But the services were really, really dry. You weren't going to get much out of it. They're more like a pep talk. You know, they were really all Army. There wasn't really much God or spirit in it or instruction. Not at all. And this man was giving sermons, and his services were just God was working through him. And he said he told me, because we talked a lot. We got along pretty well. He told me that they did not want him giving services that were spirit-filled, you know. They didn't want him really doing that. They wanted him to keep it pretty dry. And he wasn't doing that, and he didn't plan to do that. And he was at odds with his superiors over that. And one day he was gone. I don't know where he went. He was gone. And that chapel closed for a while. And I was pretty discouraged about that. But he was an example of an Army chaplain that was very spirit-filled, in contrast to the guy on the airplane. So that was that. I don't remember his name. So that's that one. That's experience two I had with Army chaplains that I remember. Okay, experience three. Go forward to, I was in the desert in Death Valley, actually, NTC, National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California in August. And it was hot. I've got a couple of pictures from these. Here's the only way you could get out of the heat there. There were no trees to speak of. Is you had to make shelter. Such as this. I don't know if I'm in there or not, but I took the picture, so no, I'm probably not in there. But That's what you had to do. You had to make your own shade and try to avoid working during the daytime. We did most of our work at night for sure because you just wanted to stay hydrated and stay out of the, I mean, this is August in Death Valley area, California, NTC, Fort Irwin, California. It was unbelievably hot. Picture off. And somebody said it got up to 120 some degrees when we were out in the field. And we were there acting as Op 4, that is opposing force. When the Army's having a big war game, you got good guys and bad guys. Well, we were the bad guys in this one. So we had our special little uniforms and Miles gear, which they use for laser tag, you know, on our gear. And we were the Op 4, which we trained hard, but we trained... we used what was then we thought Soviet equipment and stuff, some of it. But so here's a picture of me during that time, and you can see how hot it is. And yeah, that's me when I was about 30, a lot thinner. And I think I walked to the top of that mountain, believe it or not, where you'd see me standing. But it was hot, hot, hot. And God, it's like living on the moon or moonscape. So one day, this is experience 3. This is kind of tragic. Picture off. One day, word got around that it was so hot that some guy on the other group, you know, we were the opposing force in the other group, I don't know, Team Red, Team Blue. Somebody on Team Blue, and I was on Team Red, a young man, only 22 years old, just fell over dead right in front of a bunch of people from the heat. I mean, people that saw it said it looked like he was dead before he hit the ground. He must have had a heat stroke. But he was standing there amongst a bunch of people and he just hit dead. And I thought, God, you know, it's training. I mean, I've seen a lot of people get killed in training in the Army. You know, when we talk about Memorial Day, about soldiers that died in combat, you got to remember the thousands and thousands of soldiers who have died in training. Many, 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 many thousands of soldiers have died in training. And this poor guy at age 22 was one of them. And I thought it was awful. I really didn't care about any war games or any of that stuff. I just thought this was awful. That somebody died out there, you know, from the heat. A young man, 22 at that. Whole life out of him. I didn't know him. This is good tea. Lady Grey. Bigelow's. It's really delicious. All right, so we went to they had a Sunday service out in the desert. And I remember I went to that, of course, so there's probably about 25 or 30 soldiers there from my unit that went to it. And we're all sitting in the sand, and there's a vehicle, and the chaplain standing in front of the vehicle, you know, that he rode in on, Humvee. And he gave us a service, and really was glad to be there to get the service. I don't know the chaplain's name, and I don't know where he came from. I think he was part of Fort Irwin. I think he was active duty at Fort Irwin, California. Well, his whole service was, and I remember this, it was about David and Goliath, all right? How David, the little guy, slew Goliath with one stone. And you know what he said? It was all, his whole service seemed like a college football pep talk, you know, like a sports pep talk. Go get them, guys. Keep your morale up. You got them now. You know, you're doing good. Wasn't really much of a service at all. There wasn't anything about God in it that I could pick up. And then he said something that just burned into my memory. In the middle of his little pep talk, you know, yeah, go get him. Whoa, you got him on the run. Remember, David slew Goliath with one stone, and he said, you got him on the run. He says, well, I heard one of them dropped dead yesterday. He says, see how bad you got him on the run? You got him now. One of them dropped dead. Referring to the young man that died the day before in the heat. That he just used that as part of his buck them up, go get them, guys, you know. I thought that was awful. I still think it's awful. This is an Army chaplain, right? That he would, in the way he said it, it was like a coach. He was trying to give us all, and that's what the Army wants. They just want it to pep talk you up, to get you to do your job. You know, there really isn't a whole lot of feeding the spiritual side of you. And he gave that whole David and Goliath pep talk and telling us to keep up the hard work. And then he threw in that fatality and said, I heard one of them drop dead yesterday from the heat. He says, you got them running. Keep up the good work. And I was appalled. And the service was over. And everybody's filing by, shaking his hand. And this is reminiscent of an old story I told. It actually happened a few years after this. The Spirit Hawk, the wolves in sheep's clothing, and the Spirit Hawk. It's kind of along the same lines. Everybody's filing by this guy, and he's like, hey, how you doing? You know, they're shaking his hand. Nice sermon, sir. Have a good day. Yeah, how you doing? Yeah. And he got up to me with that plastic smile on his face. I didn't take his hand. I said, you know, I waited. I was the last one because I didn't want to do this in front of a bunch of people. I did not shake his hand. He had his hand out. He says, what you said about that guy dying? He says, yeah, right. You got him on the run. I said, I thought that was just awful that you would do that. I don't remember my words, but I looked that man right in the eye and I said, I thought that was awful. And I said, I don't think that's God's work at all. Should be, I don't know what I said, but I told him what I thought. And I do remember the look on his face. He's like, and he kept his hand out there, just, I got him. Well, I said to him, got him. And I walked off, and he was speechless. He was shocked. He was dumbfounded. Just standing there with his hand out, with his jaw down, not saying a word. And I walked off and left. And that is experience number 3 with Army chaplains that I recall. Experience 4, the last one. This happened a few years after this, when I was in the New York Army National Guard. And I told a story, maybe I'll put a link to it if I think of it. The tornado miracle at Mechanicsville, or Mechanicsburg, I don't know which. And 3 tornadoes, I think it was 2 or 3 tornadoes ripped through a small town in upstate New York. Around Albany, around that area, outside of Albany. And about like my town I live in now, and I saw what tornadoes will do to a house, such as the one I'm in right, old wooden house, you know, like this town's made of. It'll just devastate them. It'll blow them all over the place like they're nothing. And that's another story. I told that story. But there's a chaplain story in this. And it was a chaplain from the New York Army National Guard. I don't know who he was, honestly. He wasn't in my unit. I never saw him before, but he was with the New York Army National Guard, a chaplain. And there was a house, and I told a story about this, a miracle. And it was a miracle. And here's a picture of us. It's a grainy picture because, you know, I don't know what type of camera I was using. It's just probably maybe an old digital one, and it's not a very good quality picture, but you can make out the house, you can make out us. All right, here's that. And that's myself with my hands down by my side with the gloves and a smile on my face. I'm the guy with the gloves, hands at side, standing in front with a smile. That's me, much younger. And the other guys that I knew worked with in my unit, we all volunteered to go there and help out for a week, cleaning this town up. You know, and you can see the destruction behind us. Those were houses. Now I want you to look behind. You'll see a house standing right behind us. Right behind us. Now I want you to look at the second floor of that house.
I got to interject here on this video. I made that video last night, and it just, I posted it and I took it down because I just couldn't be at ease with this part in the fourth story where the photo of the destroyed, all the carnage from the tornado. I referred to the children that were on the second floor in a room, all of them together in the room on the second floor. But I'm pointing at and seem to be referring to what is clearly the roof above the second floor. I don't know why I did that. I think because the roof stands out more, and I just saw the roof standing out, so I pointed at that, drew attention to that. But they were on the second floor, directly beneath the black roof you see in the photo. And that's what the chaplain had said, and it was a miracle. You can see the carnage around the second floor as well. So they were on the second floor. I don't think they were in the attic, beneath the roof. So I just try to be as clear as I can. I really try to at least get the facts out there right. All right, back to the video.
There's like a slice right in the middle that's intact. What happened was a tornado hit this house and wiped everything out, and it destroyed the second floor and the roof, but it left the room, one bedroom in the middle of the house on the second floor of this big old house. It didn't touch that, and you can see that that's sticking out. That for some reason everything was wiped out around it, but that one room was left untouched. It happened that there were 5 children in that room, and nobody was hurt. And it destroyed everything around them but that room that those 5 children were in. Picture off. Now, our chaplain, division chaplain, I guess, 42nd Division, he gave a sermon there that we attended right there where we're standing. In fact, we had his picture taken right after the service. And he gave a very, very spirit-filled service there, giving God credit and glory and thanks and proof of God that miracles can happen with that house wiped out on the second floor, everything erased, but the one little room in the middle upstairs where all the children were untouched. And that man gave a very, very spiritual service, giving God the credit and glory for that miracle. So that is the fourth story of my experiences with Army chaplains. And that was when I was in. I don't know what it's like now. With all the woke stuff going on, I'd hate to think. But they seem to discourage spirit-filled services in the military. But you will find some chaplains that aren't very popular with their superiors, because they're going to feed people what they need, manna from heaven. They're going to feed people God's word, and they're going to give God the glory, and they're going to bring, some of them will, like the captain, the young captain, who said that they were going to get rid of him because they didn't want him given spirit-filled. They wanted him to keep it nice and dry, and like that jerk at NTC, that sad man who was nothing but like a high school pep talk, and then, or that, even worse, that fraud that was my battalion chaplain, who just let, when I asked him the morality of killing and warfare, heck if I know. All I know, this is a lot easier than artillery. Man, so it's a mixed bag, it was when I was in. So, I guess that's it. Really, what would I add to that? I don't know. Make of it what you will. That's all. Take care.